Hello everybody, welcome to the Open Editorial around the world, and hello to all of our pictures as well. Let me introduce you to all of our Google Hangout. We have Mohammed. Say hello, Mohammed.
Hello everyone.
We have Jazeera.
Hello.
You'll see Michael Hopper. You can see him, but you can't hear him unless he's desperate to say something. Dan Ming from our production team as well, from the stream. And then we also have Zainab. Say hello, Zainab.
Hi, everyone.
So on the stream, it's your show, it's our community show, and every now and again we like to just reach out to you and say, hey, have you got better ideas than we have? And how do we make them work for a half-hour show? Zainab, what's your idea that you're bringing to the Open Editorial meeting that you think would make a great half-hour discussion?
Okay, the first thing is elections fever in Nigeria. So I think there's a lot of emphasis right now on the next general elections in Nigeria, which is in 2015. And a lot of people seem to be investing so much time, so much energy on talking about who the next candidates will be, who will be running for president, who the ruling party is going to choose, how resources are mobilized, and so on. So I think it's a very good story to focus on. It will be very interesting to find out why Nigerians seem so passionate about something that is not taking place until the next 2 years right now.
That's weird for me. Why are they so passionate about it?
I think the first reason is the nature of politics in Nigeria, which is mainly sort of money-based, resource-based politics. That is, whoever controls political power has access to a lot of resources from oil revenues and resources just flowing from the government itself. So I think that's one main reason. Another reason is because I think right now there's a lot of access to information via social media, mobile telephony, internet, and so on. So this has sort of broadened the information that is available to people, and I think it's a way of engaging in politics itself. So I think these are the two reasons that people seem to be very interested in that.
I have a couple of follow-up questions, but I want Mohammed and Jazeera to jump in. What do you have to ask Zainab about this particular show? Would you even want to watch this show? Would you actually be, this one would be one where you'd leave the house and not worry watching the stream that day?
If I may, I think what I'd ask is, especially from Kenya, we just concluded an election ourselves, and we had a thing or two about the fever as well. Mm-hmm. But what we've observed about the type of fever we have here is the fever of voting people out. Yes. in this, you know, like voting out old people, and it's a cycle. So is that the same thing in Nigeria? And is it, what kind of civic education is taking place so that, you know, it's countering the fever and the interest that is, and making sure people are actually informed as they take to the vote? What you have probably a year and a half to go, so that's ample time for civic education programs to take root. So maybe that would be something very interesting to sort of highlight. So what particular things are being used to counter or to make sure that that fever counts for something? Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a very...
Yeah, go on, Zainab.
I just wanted to say that's a very, very good question, actually. I guess there are some similarities with Kenya as well. So one thing that I failed to mention as well is that this fever is driven by this perception that once it's time for elections, you have the ability to vote out people that you don't really like. You vote them out of power, and you vote in people that you think will represent your interests better. And another thing is, I think there's this perception as well that, you know, once you're able to vote out people and you vote in the right people, then every problem will be solved. But I don't think it's really that easy. You know, there are lots of processes that are involved in governance. It's not just the people there; it's the institutions as well.
Right.
So yeah.
Okay. So if people are just joining us, because we were actually live online, this is the Open Editorial for the stream. We're talking about particular program ideas for the stream around the issue of Africa and African stories. So Zainab has just pitched an idea about doing election fever in Nigeria. The elections are in 2015, so the whole idea is that Nigerians are very engaged 2 years ahead of the elections. Mohammed, do you have any pushback with this idea? Is there anything that you'd like to critique, or do you like it? You don't have to be polite, because this is how we hash out our ideas.
No, I'm actually encouraged that Zainab is putting this forward, because in Africa's context, coverage, media coverage, especially in the mainstream media, goes up during election season, and then it sort of dies down. And it's good to hear that Nigerians are preparing ahead of the time. But I'll be interested, like my friend from Kenya saying, to hear what makes this different and why it starts so soon, and also how this election is different from previous elections. And you've had your own version of Occupy Nigeria, and how what happened to that movement, and also how those movements on the ground already play into this. So I think it'd be interesting to hear more on the preparation side of these things, and also why this is different from a typical African election.
Okay, so Zainab, there's a lot of interest there from Njira and also from Mohammed. My pushback to this idea is that it's a really domestic story, and you get a bunch of Nigerians talking about elections. You could go on for the rest of the year, to be honest. And once they start talking about elections, it doesn't make any sense to anybody outside of the country. Yeah. So it's like either we do a deep dive and it makes no sense, but only to Nigerians, or we do a very shallow look at it, and the Nigerians are complaining that we're not doing enough information. And you know what it sounds like to me? It sounds like to me that your Nigerian broadcasters and journalists are not digging into this story enough for you, and you're expecting an international broadcaster to do the job for what Nigerian broadcasters should and could be doing. And then another layer on that is, obviously, there's always that looming idea about Nigerians shrugging their shoulders about how fair will the elections be. You know, and that's always that. You know, that's an issue for a lot of countries around the world. So that's my pushback is, and then you can help us. How do we make this so everybody is on board with it and is enjoying the discussion? But then you start discussing domestic issues and nobody's got a clue what's going on. Okay. Do you see my dilemma?
Yes, exactly. I think you raised two issues. First of all, the fact that discussing elections, Nigerian elections, will be something very, very domestic or specific to Nigerians only. And I think one way of addressing that is to sort of make constant comparisons with countries in Africa that have recently gone through elections. For example, Kenya, which is also a multi-ethnic and very diverse country with similar challenges that Nigeria is facing as well, or Ghana, which is Nigeria's neighbor, which also had elections just last year.
Very nice.
That's one way.
So then we would do a discussion. So we're talking about civic education, always that looming issue of corruption and how Nigerian citizens deal with that. What's different and unique about Nigeria's elections and the way that you approach elections? How do you get 150, 160 million people to the polls? So we can actually have a really interesting conversation that doesn't necessarily talk about dig deep in domestic issues, but really the framework of what it's like to approach a Nigerian election. Would that make sense?
I think it would. I think it would, because again, if you're thinking about a broad framework, then approaching it from the broad framework of democratic consolidation on the continent, or even the West African sub-region, I think is one way of doing that. So I think there are quite a number of angles to look at it from.
Very nice. You defended your idea very, very well.
Femi, if I may. Zainab, I have one quick question.
Okay.
Are people talking about this online already? Are there hashtags associated with the election?
Hashtags, I'm not really sure, but I know people are definitely talking about it. There are so many Facebook groups, for example. It's ridiculous, and people are definitely talking about it. That's one thing for sure. Hashtags, I'm not really sure which ones are the most trending ones for now.
Very nice. This is the open editorial for the stream. We're talking about story ideas for Africa that we can do on the program, but it's not a production team meeting, it's a community meeting. Let's go to Mohammed. You're in New York, Mohammed?
Yes.
I used to live in Brooklyn. I'm jealous. How's it doing?
It's going. It's raining this morning, but otherwise it's fine.
That's a tropical storm just going up the East Coast. Just channeling one of my previous jobs as a meteorologist. So, Mohammed, what is your elevator pitch for the story that you think the stream should be doing about Africa?
I think the story that the stream should be doing is a story about Oromo identity in diaspora and also marginalization in Ethiopia, and then the challenge that Oromo immigrants and Oromo refugees are facing, not just in the Horn of African countries where they are forcibly being sent back to the same country that they already run away from, but also in the Middle East, where and also North Africa, where they are sort of caught between two wars. On the one hand, uprising that people in North Africa, in places like Yemen, are doomed to change regimes. And you have these refugees who came in looking for safety, and then they sort of trapped between these issues. And also, if you take that...
Mohammed, just 1 second. I mean, the reason I love the stream is that sometimes there are stories and communities that I'm not familiar with. And I know you're talking about the Oromo community. Like, everybody knows exactly what you're talking about. And do you know the Oromo community?
Yes.
I know about them because they're in northern Kenya, but I don't know what they're facing.
All right.
So I'm Googling them right now.
All right. Okay. Let's start at the very beginning, Mohammed. Let's slow down, okay, and help us out who have no idea, because this is the beauty of the stream. It brings new communities into people's lives. So do basics. I'm a 10-year-old kid. This is the other side of the world. I've got no idea what you're talking about. Now start.
Great. Thank you for holding me down. The Oromo are the largest ethnic group in Ethiopia, about 45 to 50 million, depending on who you believe. And they are, among the oldest African groups who we, according to the Oromos, believe that we've invented democracy called the Gada system that long before the Magna Carta and all these fancy democratic ideals came forward, the Oromos elected and their leaders using a system of 8 years of regime change and so on and so forth. In Afan Oromo, the Oromo language is the third largest, most widely spoken in the continent of Africa, yet as you've gathered from a quick poll there, even Africans don't know this story, because Ethiopia has been projected to the outside world in a way that it is a unified country, and oftentimes as a Christian island in the sea of pagans, which is the Oromo religion, I believe in one God. In more recently...
Okay, so Mohammed, why are they refugees then? So you've given us a little introduction, so now we've got a better idea. Why is there an issue with where they are?
So basically, in the last 100 years, the Oromos have been excluded from political power, economic power, and their language and social lives have been restricted in the country. So in the 1990s, when the communist regime in Ethiopia was overthrown, a coalition government was put together, and apparently at the 1992 election, the election was rigged, and the Oromo coalition pulled out of the transitional government, and that led to the largest exodus of Oromo immigrants out of Ethiopia. And today, the largest Ethiopian diaspora are Oromos, and more recently, because this repression continues and the dissent in Ethiopia, as you've done in previous stream shows, is not tolerated, but even more so if you stretch that, Oromo dissent is not tolerated, because, as I said, the third largest African language, there's not one independent newspaper in that language.
Okay,
anywhere.
So Mohammed, tell me your program idea in one sentence. This program, today on the stream, we talk about...
Oromo people identity, marginalization, diaspora.
Okay. All right, so stop there. Then let me bring in Zainab. Zainab, are you in the least bit interested in this topic yet?
Yes, it does sound very interesting.
And again, you don't have to be polite, because like this is really the testing round. We should be really honest with each other.
Okay, okay. I just think that I need to know a bit more about it. It's something I'm not really familiar with at all. And it does sound very fascinating, but I think I would need more information about it.
Right. Okay.
Yes.
And I had to stop Mohammed, so he's got a lot more information. I didn't want to turn this into a lecture about the Oromo community. And Jazeera, I know you always speak your mind, so go on.
Oh,
What's your thoughts?
it sounds like something that would need some background information, and the fact that Mohammed had to spend the last 5 minutes doing so means we have to establish background somehow. I mean, what's interesting is that it's the largest ethnic community in Ethiopia. I had no idea about that. And I think a couple of questions I'd have to Mohammed. A, are the Oromo nomads, is that what part of the problem they're facing? Are they a nomadic community? And how do you paint it to a global context for every person in any corner of the world to understand the struggle that has been? I think that then that would rein in closer towards trying to figure out why we should empathize with that kind of story, I think.
Yeah, that's great. You kind of took those questions right out of my head. Mohammed, just answer those briefly.
First, briefly, the Oromos, there are groups of Oromo ethnic tribes that are still follow nomadic way of lives, but not all. I mean, they occupy half of the country. So they are in highland, lowland, and all around the country. And as far as how you sort of, I think the meeting is a clear example why I think the stream should do this story, because this is a story nobody is covering, and the reason that you did not know about Oromo, or a lot of people don't know about Oromo, is because it's not receiving a coverage, and the small efforts that we're doing with OPride and other blogs, it just gets, it doesn't get out there. And I think, and I'm just emphasizing that. And how do we make it make a global audience understand that? I think we can start by demystifying what Ethiopia is and what it sort of projects to the outside world. In an average person in Washington, D.C., where you guys are based, if you say Ethiopian food or Ethiopian restaurant,
oh my God, really, yes, so many places to eat. Oh my goodness.
You really can't go.
Wow. Okay, now let's do it. We can just hang out and do restaurants. No, do you know what the best thing you said to me that made me feel like it could work for the stream was that nobody knows much about this community.
Right.
And that's, isn't that when the stream manages to set up a story where you go, I had no idea about that. I love those programs. So that's the challenge that, Mohammed, you've presented for us, because even you describing it, that took 5 minutes. That's a quarter of our show gone right there with a setup. And that's a lot of time before you even started talking. So for me, it seemed to me like, as a journalist, I'm thinking, this is a documentary, this is not a discussion. Because how do you discuss something that you then have to tell everybody about this community and need to do so much setup? But the stream has done things like this before, so it's giving us a lot of food for thought and a challenge to how we even do that.
Femi, we actually did get other tweets from people about this topic. I pulled one up. Someone wrote, can you not hear me?
Yeah, we hear you. Go on.
Oh, you can hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Someone wrote, what about the untold story of Oromo political prisoners in Ethiopia?
Ooh.
Wow.
So I wonder, how would, does Mohammed think we could find a former political prisoner?
I mean, you can find 100 political prisoners, and you can start with me if you are looking for a political prisoner. In just to sort of go back to what Femi was saying earlier, and
Mohammed, you can't say you're a former political prisoner and then not tell your story.
You know?
Well, this is really not about me, and I think this story is much larger. And Ethiopia has the largest number of Oromos, but also the largest number of Oromo political prisoners languishing in jails around that country today, and estimated at 25,000 as we speak. And just to give you a very good example, a former Ethiopian defense minister who was a political prisoner himself once said, there are so many Oromo prisoners in Ethiopian jails that Ethiopian prisons speak Oromo language. So this is a very big issue in
Do you know what? I think that might be the stream story, not the Oromo community, because that's a whole history. I mean, you went back 100 years. When you said 100 years, I was like, man, that's a long time. But Oromo political prisoners, that's a story that we can get bang straight into, a little bit of an introduction, and then talk about it. And also there were going to be political refugees, and that to me feels like that's manageable in half an hour. but I'm just like, I'm just riffing here.
I just have a question though.
Yeah, go on.
Can I come in? Yeah, would there be people willing to speak? Like the former political prisoners, okay, good and fine, you're in New York, and I understand you will be able to speak, but then people within Ethiopia.
Right.
Yeah, I'm just...
That's the tricky thing. I think it's a show that might need some time to set up, and it's always difficult when you're talking about something that a country might not be very comfortable about having aired. And then we have it when we talk about places like Iran or China. It's difficult because we don't always have access, and so that's going to be quite challenging. And sometimes it means that we have to talk to the diaspora other than what's happening in country. But if we can get in country, or even blogs, or social media can get into a lot of places. That's right. Zainab, you make a really obvious and valid point. But the political prisoner story is for me is that's the one where I'm like, okay, I get it. We could do that.
If I may just come in here, I think people are dying to be heard. We are saying here's out, and there's this story that nobody is hearing. And just last night at 4 a.m. I was on the phone in Egypt with the refugees. And we put out a story about Oromo refugees who were beaten and refused medical service and police services, just mostly because they were taking us Ethiopian nationals with all issue over Nile, and you can find hundreds from Canada, Australia, UK, Norway. They're everywhere. So you can easily get a lot of people to talk about issues and challenges in that country, but also their personal stories of being in jail and having families and friends still in jail.
And also, what's the point of an Ethiopian ambassador if they don't come onto programs to talk about issues in their country? That's what an ambassador does, right? So why would they not want to talk about this? So Zainab, I don't think it would stop us from having the conversation. But you're right, it's tricky. Yeah, it's tricky.
But yeah, that's good.
And it's the story that the Ethiopian ambassador would not want you to know. And if the Ethiopian ambassador comes on the show today, he would tell you that Ethiopia is fine in democracy, there is free press, in those things, and there are no political prisoners. That's what they would say. But the reality
isn't that what makes the discussion very, very exciting?
Exactly.
I think so.
Right?
Okay. I think so.
Okay, I think you've got us all convinced now. We like that one. I like that one. Okay, well, people are watching us. People are tuning in. You're tuning into the open editorial of the stream, where we actually get rid of all our bad production team and ask the people who watch the show and take part online, what stories would you like us to cover? We're looking at Africa today, and I want to introduce you, if you haven't met her already, Jazeera. She's in Nairobi in Kenya. It's not like you to be the last person to speak, right?
No, it's all good. I think I needed extra time.
What is your elevator pitch? You all came with more than one story, but I think you should pick the one you care about the most, that you feel will resonate with the world.
Okay, I care about both in equal measure, but I'll go with the first one, which was about looking at the girl child and the efforts towards empowering the girl child in Africa, but juxtaposing that against the boy child and what's happening now. This being a phenomenon is the boy child being neglected as a result of focus to the girl child. You look at the Millennium Development Goals, and goal number 3 talks about gender equality and girl empowerment. But what does that mean for the boy child? Is he more emasculated? Well, what does it mean when he's being told to be a man? Or what's happening, what's going through his mind when he looks at all the programs and all the efforts that are going towards empowering the girl child? And you look at some of the social issues that are happening, cases of rape and cases of, in some parts of Kenya, for instance, where you have a lot of young men and boys succumbing to alcoholism, some dropping out of school to go get, jobs, to work in farms and stuff like that, just to earn a living because they're supposed to be the man. And so what does that look like? So it's just a juxtaposition. That's something very rare. And I think the world over, not just in Africa, that needs to be explored.
So, you know how the show always starts. I'm Femi, okay, and you're in the stream. Today, finish the sentence.
We're looking at empowering the girl child. But what does that mean for the boy child?
Okay.
Yeah.
The phrase "girl child," I always find that's a really development world phrase.
It is, isn't it?
I hate that.
But they use that.
Yeah,
they use that.
It's used everywhere. I mean, everybody uses
it's
it.
What
girl,
is used,
child.
you know?
Why don't we just say
girl? This.
Yeah, girl.
The girl. Okay, yeah. They try and think about it from a child's perspective, but I think it's a girl towards a woman and a boy to a man. Because I think it's not just girls and boys, I think it's also men and women in society today. What's the case, the story of the girl child or the girl who was empowered and became a woman? What became of the boy who sat next to her in class and watched this girl go through affirmative action or go through, there's always a structure around them because we're considered vulnerable. But what happened to the boy in the process? You know?
So is this men's lib then? If I was just going to boil it down to its basics, you're feeling that young boys and young men in Africa are suffering because there's emphasis on girls?
They are suffering because, as far as it goes, and from what I've seen, is they grew up against the backdrop of being told, be a man, be a man. But what does that look like? When a girl is told to be a girl, it's probably wear your dress proper, tie your hair this way. There's always something that that accompanies that statement. But for the boy child, what does that look like? And that's just from a social context. Then we move into the development world and we move into education. We move into these spaces that they're supposed to occupy. Yes, the girl child there's gender equality, which is one discussion, but there's also women empowerment or girl empowerment. But what is boy empowerment, or what does boy empowerment look like today?
This is really intriguing because you're really flipping the script. Because right now the United Nations are developing, and I was there at this big high-level panel report, and they were working out what happens after the Millennium Development Goals.
Exactly.
In 2015, and one of the emphasis that they've got, and they're not embarrassed to say so, is we are going to focus on women and we're going to focus on girls for the next 15 years, and we don't care who criticizes us for it because they need our support, and that's really important. So it's really interesting that you're saying, but what happens about the boys?
No, and what I mean that's all good if they're going to go with that for 15 more years. The question is, will we reach a point then where the girl is empowered? Let's imagine a world where the girl is empowered, but where's the boy? Where will that be gender equality, or will it be we're kicking me back for all the years that the girls were, put down or whatever?
You have met African men, right?
I have. And
how much more empowerment do they need?
That's the thing. Are they empowered, or are they made to look like they're empowered? And what I mean is, look at some of the boys, the young boys today, who are, for lack of a better word, lost. You can't quite figure out what's happening. There's so many boys now who are very comfortable just taking the back seat. And I'm not saying it's wrong. All I'm saying is, are we going to then come to 2030 and start, okay, where's the boy child? Let's empower him now.
I'm just having the debate with you right now because girls, they don't get to go to school. They have to come out of school. They have babies too early. They're cleaning the house where the boys are finishing school. They're not even getting to primary level. I am mad with you already. What I'm
saying is, we look at why the girl is dropping out of school. Who's impregnating the girl?
Yes.
Well, who's impregnating the girl? Or who's raping the girl?
Yes.
Who's doing this to the girl, and why are they doing it?
But that's not
there are more and more cases.
About education.
It's education, but there's also emasculation, which is also disempowerment to some extent.
See, this is
So what does gender equality look like?
It's a good discussion.
Exactly.
Because I'm pushing back entirely on this, but
clearly, but I'm pushing right back. What I mean is, we focus so much on the victim. We focus so much on the victim, so to speak, but where's the perpetrator, so to speak, as well?
Yeah, and I don't think girls and women are victims either.
Yeah, I don't believe that, but they're painted that way. So, someone else chip in. Let's hear it.
Yeah. Break us apart, Mohammed. What are your thoughts?
I think it's interesting, and I totally agree that it shouldn't be a boy and girls thing, and I think it's good that they're focusing on women and girls in the post MDG initiatives. But I totally agree that we should not forget the boys, and that's not to say that I'm the only African guy on the meeting today.
How about that?
See, I don't think there's any empowerment. Oh yeah, well maybe right. Yeah.
Okay. I mean.
I think this would be a very rowdy discussion. That's the.
It would, and that's the whole point.
It is, but then again, of course, I think from a more personal point of view, I think a lot of African men really don't like to talk about these things openly, and especially on the challenge that we continue to face inside in the continent.
Right.
That could be a challenge. But as a journalist, when I think of this story, I think of like a long narrative, and I'm still not seeing exactly how you would. Well, I guess it's the issue that I was facing earlier. But how would you boil it down to a show that could be engaging in passionate? Is it about MDGs, which involves the UN, or is it a conversation about the place of women and in the place of men in African society?
I would say it's the second version, because if you ask people about MDGs and they're not in our field of work, I bet you no one would know what an MDG was if it sat on their head.
Yeah.
Right? So it's much better about the African man and the African woman. And to be honest, this is a conversation that happened in the 1970s in America and across Europe, because it was about women were being so empowered, and feminism was such a big deal that men were going, well, what about us? You know, are we being emasculated? And I think that's really what you're saying now in Africa.
Yep.
And that's always a good discussion, men and women. That's what I would love to get someone.
It's always a good one.
Angelique Kidjo in this conversation, because she could just be a show by herself. Angelique Kidjo is an amazing singer from Benin, and now you're going to have to search for her, and you'll search for her, you'll see her videos and records, and you'll go, oh my goodness, it's that woman. And not only is she an amazing singer and an ambassadoress for Africa, she's also gone out of her way to set up girls' schools, and it's all about female empowerment. And she's like this big, she's smaller than me, she's like 5 feet tall, but this giant personality, and I would love to hear what she had to say about the idea that maybe boys are suffering, and that the girls, there's too much emphasis on girls, because I think she'd be an incredibly powerful voice. But who else would be like on that? That would be, she'd be on my wish list. Who else would be on your wish list for this discussion?
A stately man figure. I don't know who. I'm trying to think who would come and talk about the boy.
Yeah, I mean, they don't have to be named people. They could just be great.
I'm just trying to figure out.
But I think
I'd really have to think about
basic. Men suffering because women are becoming more powerful. That's basically it.
Yeah. And I'd look at it this way, much as, yes, maybe it's still a patriarchal society, maybe the guy is more likely to get a top job. The question is he getting it just because, someone else has decided he must get it, or is it because he's actually, an educated? And then the concept of education comes in there. Is he educated? Does he know how to work, with the dynamics of, being a leader, being, in charge of men and women alike? So those are some of the things that you can dissect into in the whole concept of, okay, fine, as much as we're a patriarchal society, how's the guy lifting up the woman, and how's the woman lifting up the guy? I think that would be a nice way to look at it.
And Jira, what I love about this conversation is also it would work if we did it about India or Pakistan.
Yeah, exactly.
Or anywhere in the developing world where women are really being supported. It actually works in South America. It works all over the world.
It works.
So that's what's
in the global South.
Appealing. Because everybody gets it, and everybody from the community can pile in on the discussion. It's not about being an African man or African woman. It's about where we are in our development.
Exactly. In the developing world, how's the gender equality, dynamic playing out?
I like that, but I also like the fact that we'd start it in Africa, and then the community can tip in with their experiences. Otherwise, we make it too global, and then it becomes unmanageable.
It loses. Exactly.
When we talk about African men and African women, that's a great conversation by itself.
There we go.
Zainab, you're very quiet.
Yeah.
Thoughts on this idea? Would it be a stream that you would want to watch?
Yes, definitely. It sounds very, very interesting. I would definitely watch it, because I would start watching it with a very, very angry mind.
I know.
And I guess that's probably the only reason why I would watch it, because just hearing about it would make me so pissed off.
Me too.
So I guess the two obvious questions that I would have in mind while I start watching that show is that, first of all, you seem to imply that just because women are being empowered, there are so many initiatives and policies targeting women and girls. This is leading to a disempowerment of young boys and men, etc. So I think the real issue then is that perhaps we would need to, of course, stop empowering women or stop targeting women specifically, and then just go on empowering both young men and both young women. And then I would end up turning the conversation on its head again. So if we're not empowering young women, or if we're not targeting policies specifically at them, then it means we'll just make policies for young men. And I think it's a bit confusing, and it's a bit, but it's interesting. It's definitely interesting, and it will get a lot of people talking.
Indira, why did you even come up with this idea? It seems like you were deliberately trying to poke us.
No, what was really funny is when Dan sent me, I happened to talk to Dan yesterday, and I was just from reading a brief about the 11th International Dialogue on Population and Sustainable Development that's coming up in October. And the post-2015 MDGs agenda was partly mentioned. So I was reading about the girl child and girl empowerment and a lot of the girl child, and I was like, that's great that we're committed and we're dedicated. But I thought about it, and I was like, okay, I'm a young woman, for instance, in Africa, and I look at young men my age. Where are they? Are they am I an equal contender, or have they just put their hands across and just say, okay, let her pass through because she's a girl?
I like that.
Are we contending as No, really. Are we contenders, or am I just being given a free pass type of thing? And it just got me thinking about now young boys or young girls in the community. The young girls are being put into some program or other. Maybe it's a marginalized community, for instance. And there's a program that's come and protecting the girl child, but by default, the girl child then being painted, or the girl being painted as this somewhat person who's then removed from this situation and put in a certain incubator, while the boy is left there to fend for himself. What does that make of him as he grows older? What is his perception towards his fellow child who's a girl? How does he develop into a man, And those are some of the things I started thinking about. I was like, okay, forget the other idea I had in mind. Let's talk about this. I never hear enough people talking about it.
It's a good one.
And I've seen, and I read something about asking, okay, fine. What if when the boy is raped, what happens? Is it going to be treated with the same? It's happening. It's happening. There are boys being raped. Will they come out and talk about it? Or is this something they'll carry on? And then, so that's a disempowerment, in itself down the line. And so that's how the whole thing came to mind. Yeah.
I think this also ties into the question of when women are raped and what developmentally leads men to do that, and
exactly
what is underlying all of this. And there's this attitude that boys will be boys and that it's inevitable. But I think that, Ninja, you bring up an excellent point.
Yeah, and this was actually raised in one of our recent episodes where we talked about child marriage around the world. We talked about the need not just to educate girls, but also to provide good education for boys and men, so that they know better than to try to marry a young woman and reach out to someone who can be a partner. So the conversation, it exists in the U.S., it exists in the developed world as well as the developed world. How we can empower our women and girls at the same time without neglecting our men. This would be a great show.
Yeah.
So may I just come in?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. So I'm just wondering. Okay, yes, these conversations are taking place in the U.S. or in India or in Pakistan, but I'm wondering if in Africa we're really there yet, because young boys are being molested. Young boys or young men, do not have opportunities. Some of them do not have opportunities to do many things. But then at the same time, if we look at the whole system itself, like you said earlier, it's still very patriarchal. It's still a system that benefits men more. Ultimately, women are the ones that are more marginalized, more alienated. Women just suffer more in so many aspects of life. So if we start focusing more on men, then would we risk alienating more women in the process?
I think I'd say it's not an either or. We're not saying, take the spotlight from one gender. Yeah. The question of gender equality is still always skewed towards the girl or the woman, and for rightful reasons. Much of the world is patriarchal by default. the question becomes, how can the boy child or how can the man be part of the women empowerment? Which means by them, in and of themselves, much as the societies may be tailored to benefit them, they need to be empowered to know that, how about this girl? She's capable. She's just as capable as I am. Is that the thought process they go with into the systems that benefit them by default?
I have an idea that I'd like to pitch to you and see how you like it.
Okay.
And it was from a tweet that I got yesterday. I got so excited, we tweeted backwards and forwards for about 20 minutes. And it was from a lady called Farah Chowdhury. And she wanted to suggest that we did a show about Mogadishu and how much it's changed. And I love the idea of doing a whole show about Mogadishu and all the cool things that are happening in Mogadishu. Because usually, when you think of Mogadishu, you're like, oh my God, not even the government can set up in Mogadishu. They're in Nairobi. That's how bad it is. And I love the idea of doing the Somalia show and everything you didn't know about Somalia that's cool and great and thriving.
Yep.
And everybody knows about Mogadishu, but for really bad reasons. And I wondered if there might be a way of maybe bringing in, an Al Jazeera correspondent for that region, or one of the correspondents who covered the worst of the fighting. Somebody maybe going back, the young people in Mogadishu talking about all the stuff they're doing. I think we featured on the stream a photographer who was taking photographs in Mogadishu that were great. I just love it just tickles me, the idea of having this show about Mogadishu where it's nothing that you would expect and it's just everybody kind of going, hello, this is Mogadishu today. What do you think?
Definitely. I think as a Nairobian, I'd be excited to see that. Yeah.
I think it would be an excellent show because, like you said, when people think of Mogadishu, I mean, the challenges remain, and the peace there is very precarious. But people are going back and saying, they thrown their fears away, and from UK, from the US, and other places. And there's a journalist, Hamza _Africa on Twitter, who is sending these amazing stories about daily life there, and people going down to the beaches and what it is like to take a plane from Mogadishu to a different city. But again, to come back to Mogadishu, shops are opening up and people are starting to go to cinemas and other things. But it's still, they face threats. And just about 2 months ago or so, there was a bomb that went off and killing several people in Mogadishu. So I think it would be a fantastic story to do, and it's definitely a timely one.
Yeah, I mean, you have to balance out the cheerleading with the reality of life, but maybe it could be, the reality of life of living in Mogadishu, and it's not what you might think. Maybe that's the show.
Yeah, or a high risk, high return type of thing, That, I think the most recent editorial, I may have read it even on Al Jazeera, just talking about how people are going back despite the high risk. And I think it also ties to the much needed, and the much, talked about quest to rewrite the African narrative. And so here's a city rebuilding itself from scratch, know. And that's the African narrative being redefined, an African narrative, not the African narrative, but an African part of it. People who are hosting festivals there, like I know someone who has been going back there and is doing a music festival there, just to show that, we can make this happen. And so that's just showing people who are saying, despite the reality that has been, for the past X number of years, we're saying that, this is how we're changing it. And it's towards changing the perception of Mogadishu. I think that would be a nice topic or a nice headline, towards changing the perception of it anyway.
While we're on this topic, I just want to give a shameless plug for our website. Someone on the team... I have it up on the screen here. Someone on the team did a piece on this journalist named Abdi Latif, who goes back to Somalia and he Instagrams what he sees.
That's the story I was talking about. Yes. We should get him on. I like that. That's great.
Nice.
That's awesome. Great. So that wasn't my idea. It was just something that somebody tweeted yesterday when we were talking about the open editorial, and it just resonated. I just said, yes, let's do that, because I like challenging people's perceptions of what Africa is, and I really love that. Okay, so people who are just joining, you're late. This is the open editorial meeting of the stream where we go out to our community and ask them about program ideas and pitches that they have for the show. So I'm just going to recap what we've got. And we've got some great stuff here. Nigerian elections and election fever, 2 years ahead of the elections. and maybe frame it in the way of what's different or special about the way Nigeria runs its elections compared to other places. And then we looked at the Oromo community, but then we narrowed it down to political prisoners and what's going on with the political prisoners situation. And I think that is a great conversation that makes us very focused. And the Oromo community, as we now know, is a group and a community that are originally based in Egypt, but now are in many places around the world. And then our last idea came from Jazeera in Kenya, which was the idea of what's happening to men and boys, because female empowerment is such a big deal for girls and women in Africa. So what about the men? Which I think is like an inbuilt argument right there.
Right there.
Let me just ask you before we go, because it's not often that we get a lot of feedback, but not hearing the feedback. We get tweets and comments about the shows and things that you like and don't like about the show. And Jazeera, you can start.
Wow! Oh, I did not expect to start. I think we need more time for the shows. I think I'm going to say that.
Yeah. It's
You're going to have to find more time for the stream. Damn it! You're going to have to find more time. Because it feels like this. It's just get something started.
Exactly.
And people are just warming up and tweeting, and time's up. So I think it would be interesting to find out how can you continue. Is it through serial sort of conversations online that are serialized, or would the shows then come back somehow, in part 2 of what was discussed last time, type of thing?
Well, we do
just
have
to make sure that there's
show.
continuity.
Do you ever go to the post show, or do you just watch the podcast? Yeah.
But even the post show is like just over all of a sudden, because there's some of these topics is such that people just warm up within the first 10 minutes. Then into the 15th minute, everyone is like, okay, yes.
Yeah, it gets
And then
juicy.
by the 20th minute, you're coming to the end.
Yeah.
And fine, to the post show, everyone still has that one point they needed to continue with from the 15th minute. And so it just feels like, where are these spaces to actually dig into, the meat of most of this stuff?
What would be an idea, if we had a broadcast that could be any length, what would you suggest it would be?
Wow, an hour? I know, that's ambitious, but I'd say an hour.
Killing me.
Only because time flies. Only because time flies.
Yeah.
Only because the conversation is never that boring. You're not talking about some boring conference about some boring thing. It's actually something people have insight and different opinions towards, so time kind of flies by. Yeah.
Zainab, your comments about the show, now that you can kind of tell us almost face-to-face, pros and cons, things you like or don't like?
Well, first of all, definitely I like the fact that it's very interactive, especially with people that are online on Twitter and on Google as well. I really like that aspect about it. In terms of cons, I really can't think of any beyond what was mentioned, what Nigeria mentioned about the time allocated, which of course is just not enough. But then again, I'm just wondering whether 1 hour is feasible. Maybe somewhere between 45 minutes or so, because 1 hour every week.
Yeah.
I
know. It's hard.
I mean, it's very interesting. I would love to watch it for like 3 hours, but then you have to think about the time that people have to actually allocate to that every single day. That's just being
Zainab, I have to tell you a secret. When we did a show and Jazeera was on the show, she stayed on this Google Hangout for about an hour after the show had finished.
I did.
So she was still chatting to her guest. Was it in South Africa?
Yep.
She was still
and we went on and on.
For an hour after we had done.
Wow.
We had to keep going. Yeah.
Wow.
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to bill you for that later.
Yeah. So
it really cost me the following morning. It really cost me. I was so groggy.
Mohammed, what would you say about the show that you now that we're directly speaking, that would help us make it a better show?
I think you should be very proud of your show. You're redefining the business of journalism, and I think a lot of people are scared of what the stream is doing or already copying what the stream is doing. So you should be very proud of it, and I love the stream. And I think the only thing, as it was said, is maybe make it a 45-minute show and have an extended version on the web. In what I think usually, at least, from my perspective, there's a lot of pre-hype during the show and people chiming in, and it's conversational. You bring in the news back, you're giving the news back to the people, and then after that sort of it dies down. And so if there could be a continuity about the conversation afterwards, be that by pushing more, or here's this cool, nice show that we did, you can still continue the conversation on the web and continue the conversation on Facebook in other ways. So some sort of continuity between the show. And maybe depending on your budget and other things, maybe if you could give it sort of a specific regional or some sort of grouping and cluster it somehow so that people can come back to say if you have a show focused on Africa every week and people can follow and that's their show, that's their hour and dedicated to that show,
right.
So that there is that sort of buy-in so that you're not in India one week, you're in Africa the other week, and then in Brazil the next week.
Yeah. Well, do you know what? This is a proof to the fact that the show is really interactive, and I've loved in talking to you and with you. And when you see your show idea coming up on the stream, you'll be like, yes, that was my idea.
That was me.
Do you know what I pitched an idea before I joined the stream, and they did it, and I was so excited to see my show idea on the stream.
Aww,
so
that's cool.
It's just a great moment. Even if you're already in broadcasting or journalism, it's exciting to see an idea that you thought of get on television. So I'm hoping.
You know what else would be cool, Femi?
What? You got more?
Yeah, I just remember something.
I have my lunch waiting here. I'm hungry.
I know, sorry, I'm done. 2 minutes. So I was in Berlin 2 months ago for a Youth in Africa conference. And what was very interesting about it was Germans organized it, not Africans themselves. So it was a conversation about Africans, but not in Africa, for instance, one. And the fact that it was easier for all of us to meet outside of the continent than within the continent, and just to explore some of those things. So it would be really cool to see what can the stream do about, maybe land in Nairobi and get people to pick people who can come and represent their country on a thematic issue that's discussed and, live streamed or whatever. Like just have a physical, stream type of thing, like a conference yearly type of thing.
I love mandazis, and I just would come for the donuts.
Just come to Nairobi for the mandazis. Yeah, I'm just pitching Nairobi here. We have great internet most of the time.
Donuts.
Anyway, so
all right.
So you definitely like East African food. I can see that.
I love East African food, and also my little side thing is like East Africans are the most gorgeous Africans in the entire continent.
Whoa!
I damn you and your pretty looks. All right. Okay, we are so done.
Zainab has a side eye. Zainab has such a side eye right now.
Have a great weekend, everybody. And remember, you know where you will find me. You'll find me online, stream.aljazeera.com. Take care, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye-bye. Bye.